First class, maybe. This is abnormal psychology. I'm Dr. Bradway. Oh, my hair's a mess. Okay, I have to warn you before we get started. There is either nudity in today's lecture or there's not. It's your decision as to whether there is or there isn't. So let's get started and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay. Abnormal psychology. Okay, this is Naked Guy. This is back in the 1980s. He walked around the Berkeley campus without any clothes on, and from time to time they made him put on a modesty thing, which turned out to be uh, two handkerchiefs tied together. That was his modesty thing, and you can see the guy laughing about it. Berkeley's one of the most liberal schools in the country, and you can see the policeman's laughing. There's his friend smoking a possibly a cigarette. Cigarette, maybe it was a joint. You never know. Anyway, eventually they kicked him out of school. He was a student there, and he heard in sociology class that society dictated how people should act and how they should dress, and that's the reason he walked around naked. He walked around for a couple semesters, but people were offended. They weren't real. They were afraid that when he sat down in a chair with his naked derriere, that he might contaminate the chair. So he had special chairs that he sat down in. I mean, it was really kind of interesting. But eventually, even the most liberal school in the country decided that they couldn't tolerate that, and so they kicked him out of school. So is this normal? I guess we're talking about abnormal psychology. So the question is this normal? Everybody else has lots of clothes on and he has nothing on. Is that acceptable? Let me show you another picture. This is an indigenous group in the Amazon River Valley, where it's hot and humid, and it's hot enough that you don't really need to wear clothes. It's like temperature ranges from 80 to 120 degrees in that area. Very, very humid. So the question is this okay? Is this abnormal for these men to wander around naked? And women? How about that? They're at a party and she's giving her boyfriend or somebody a slap. I don't know if that's her boyfriend or not. She's like a head taller than he is. She sure drilled him. Is that okay? Is this abnormal? How about this? Is this abnormal? This is husband and wife, and it looks like he's been beating on her. Is it okay for her to hit him? Is it okay for him to hit her? At one point in our society, in the United States, wife beating was normal behavior. It was relatively normal behavior. It wasn't that long ago, maybe 50, 60 years ago. This was normal behavior in many parts of the country. How about that? Wait a minute. So we're hitting people. Here we go. She's slapping her boyfriend. He's hitting his wife. And they're boxing. And of course, this is a sport. Is it okay for them to do that? How about this? This guy's on the street. He's got his two bottles of wine there, and you can see from his face that he's probably pretty tipsy. Drunk in public. Is that acceptable behavior? He's sitting on a park bench. These guys are at a bar, and this guy is barely awake. He's so drunk. Is that acceptable behavior? How about this? This guy is smoking medicinal marijuana. Is that acceptable? How about that? This guy's out at a big party, at a big 420 party in Berlin, smoking about the biggest joint you've ever seen. Well, maybe not. It looks almost like a cigar. Normal or abnormal? Is this normal? 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 Is this okay? Is that normal? How about this? This guy's chasing the dragon. That's opium that he's heating, and he's breathing in the vapor from the opium. How about this? Normal, abnormal? His fingers say love, Love. Is that normal? Is that normal? Is that normal? Is that normal? Let's see, where do we go from here? How about this? Public displays of affection. Is this okay? They're right in the middle of this sidewalk. Can they do that? How about these people? If that's okay, is that okay? Open mouth. Insert tongue. Is that okay? Is that okay? Is this normal behavior? How about this? Lindsay Lohan getting a snog. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Sorry. And the answer is it all depends. It all depends on which society you live in. There are you guys have taboos that that the general public doesn't have. You have taboos against dealing with dead people. And the reality is that I used to work in a morgue and I handled dead people all the time. Most people don't touch dead people. Most people don't. They never come in contact with them. Somebody dies, they call Ghostbusters to come and pick them up. But when you work as a medic, like I did, I was a lab tech. You deal with dead people all the time. I've worked in emergency rooms. We dealt with dead people all the time. I dealt with in ICU and CCU, and we dealt with dead people all the time. Okay. So should you be shocked? What's normal? What's abnormal? That's the question. Is it unusual? What is abnormal behavior? Is it unusual? Is it deviant from social standards? Your social standards are obviously different from mine because I expected to handle dead people and to handle body parts. That was my job. That's what I did. Does the behavior represent faulty perceptions or strange interpretations of reality? Does the behavior create significant personal distress? Is the behavior maladaptive or self-defeating? Is the behavior dangerous to the individual or other individuals? And we can go back through this and we can see these, and some of these, that's probably he was trying to uh, bother people. That's what he was trying to do, and he did. And eventually, he got kicked out of school for it. These guys, they don't really care what we think. She probably doesn't care what we think either. But is that normal or abnormal behavior? This, of course, is a crime. Society has deemed this unacceptable behavior, but not this. Drunk in public, yeah, he can probably be arrested for being drunk and disorderly in public, but this guy's in a bar. He's just as drunk, probably more drunk than this guy is. Is he going to be arrested? Probably not. Medical marijuana is legal in 30 states now, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But smoking pot outside, even in states where it's legal, that's not very common. This is opium. Opium isn't legal anywhere. And he's shooting up with something. It's more like he's drawing blood. He's got a whole syringe full of blood. Public displays of affection. My wife and I kiss all the time, whether it's public or not. We try not to do that. uh, and I don't have any boyfriends, and I don't think my wife has any girlfriends. Abnormal behavior usually includes the following three characteristics. It is culturally inappropriate. So your culture is one thing, my culture is something totally different. Not totally different. Actually, they're probably fairly close to each other. But you have taboos that I don't have. I don't think I probably have any taboos you don't have, but it's possible. Does it cause subjective distress in the individual if it bothers you? So if you saw any of this behavior and if it bothered you, then now we got a problem. Well, not that probably, but that. Going the wrong direction again. Oh, there we go. Okay. I mean, that may bother you, but then again, they're in their own realm, and you don't have a right to tell them that they can't be or act the way that they do. This may be unacceptable behavior. That certainly is. That's boxing. Well, anyway, I'll stop playing with the pictures. Does it cause psychological disability or impairment in the individual? And of course, if it does, now we got a problem. The behavior seems at odds with cultural expectations of appropriateness and propriety. Both the behavior itself and the context in which the behavior is displayed is important. And of course, you wouldn't expect to see somebody walking down the street looking like this, but this guy's going to a football game and he's a Georgia Bulldogs fan. Why he has a rhinoceros horn on his helmet, I'm not I'm not exactly sure. Is that acceptable behavior? Well, obviously someplace it was because she was in Walmart. Cultural relativity is a perspective that highlights different cultures. It may utilize different standards in the definition of abnormality. To not be anti Semitic in Nazi Germany would have been considered abnormal behavior. Hence, the judgment of another person's normality depends on the values and traditions of the culture in which he or she lives. And I've lived in Germany and I've lived in Japan. And some things they do in Germany and Japan are not similar to what happens in the United States. I don't remember seeing anything like this. This is actually in the United States, though, I think. Lane starts here for register 11 and 12. Please wait for the next available cashier. Okay. I'm not sure what that last word is. Anyway, acceptable behavior. Some places, probably not. You wouldn't want to run around in Utah dressed like that. I'm sure that they would be a little upset. From children's book in Germany in 1936, these are Jewish people, and this says you are not allowed to go. Jewish people, you're not welcome here, is what it says. Acting in a manner that does not reflect the prevailing culture may not be considered a mental disorder. Overt behavior may not be culturally inappropriate, yet it may still be considered abnormal. Some culturally inappropriate behaviors may be more accurately defined as criminal rather than simply abnormal. You can see through her pants and you can see her underwear. Is that acceptable? How about that? bow tie is a little confusing. Subjective distress is a negative internal emotion or experience that is real to the individual but not directly observed by other people. Subjective distress can include the following: unhappiness, fear, apathy, or guilt, visual and auditory experiences, physical aches and pains. Some individuals who display symptoms of abnormal behavior may deny any subjective distress, for example, manic states, antisocial personality states, and this is, of course, Britney Spears, and she has, from time to time, she has shown both of those behaviors. Manic behavior when she shaved her head, antisocial personality when she started ranting about people bothering her, and they took her sons away. I think she had three. Maybe she only had two. Anyway, they took her two sons away from her. Now she's married to somebody else, and she's had another baby. If unable to function adequately in social roles, one may have a psychological disability, impairment, or dysfunction. It can be considered analogous to a physical disability, an application of the disease model of abnormal behavior. So, and that is the question: what's psychological disability? How do we know if somebody is psychologically disabled? And this is a good question. If you spend your childhood on playing video games and you're unable to function in society, is that make you abnormal? Something to think about for the future. Video games haven't become as addictive as they seem to be now, up until now. And I know somebody who died playing video games in his 30s. He was in his 30s, and all he did was play video games. And his mother supported him because he was her baby. Not all individuals who display symptoms of abnormal behavior experience difficulties in their social functions. People with eating disorders, such as bulimia, this is not normal behavior, but at the same time, socially, they're fine. Socially, they don't show any problems. This is how they stay slender. Psychological disability is a continuum along which people vary. Most fall into the middle range with only mid to moderate handicaps. Any separation of normal from abnormal is arbitrary. And of course, that is part of the problem. What is abnormal and what is not? How do we define abnormal and how do we define normal? Individuals with good mental health tend to share several attributes. They effectively function and find satisfaction in life. They have lasting and emotionally gratifying relations. They're more likely to make a realistic appraisal of their talents and shortcomings. Good mental health tends to leave a person open to alternative ways of behaving. So, what if somebody's a perfectionist? They're never happy with their behavior ever. And some people think, oh, that's a type A personality. That person's brilliant. But do they find satisfaction in their life? Do they have lasting and emotionally gratifying relations? We can look at Elon Musk, for example. Elon Musk has what, a dozen children around the world with half a dozen women. Why has he why has he found it so difficult to stay with a select woman? Isn't that the way it's supposed to be? You're supposed to marry one person and stay with them the rest of your life. But he doesn't seem to adhere to that. He kind of bounces from one person to the next, one woman to the next. I don't know how he's taking care of all of his children. I guess that's not really any of my business. Somebody should be thinking about it. I hope all of his kids are being taken care of. He's the richest man in the world. Many terms have been used to refer to abnormal behavior: psychopathology, mental illness, behavior disorder, emotional disturbance. Unfortunately, there is a tendency for terms referring to abnormal behavior to acquire a derogatory meaning. It is far easier to label mental disorders than explain and understand them. And this is part of the problem. There's a lot of people that don't believe in mental disorders. They don't believe in abnormal psychology. They consider it a misunderstanding. Your misunderstanding. And all you need to do is change people's thinking patterns. And that takes care of everything. So there is no depression, there is no anxiety, there is no obsessive compulsive disorder. None of that exists. And some of these people are psychologists. At the turn of the 20th century, hospitals were set up to house individuals with intellectual deficits. These were referred to as schools for the feeble minded. And this is, of course, the New Jersey Home for the Feeble Minded Women in Vineland, New Jersey. And this is a picture of it in 1905. From this concept of feeble minded came categorization with its own terms. Moron was used to mean someone with borderline intellectual capability. Imbecile was a term for someone with moderate intellectual disability, and an idiot was reserved for people with the most severe intellectual incapacity. And at the turn of the 20th century, you could refer to somebody as a moron, an imbecile, or an idiot. And they were legal terms. They were medical terms that were being used in medicine. In 1961, all the other terms were jettisoned by the medical community for a neutral term, mental retardation. 1968 it was incorporated into the mental health lexicon in the DSM-2, and this is a copy of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Number 2, DSM-2. This is in 1961. I was born in 1949. 1967, I graduated from high school. As 1968 was all this lexicon. Before that, we talked about morons, idiots, and imbeciles. 1961, all that was changed. 1968, it was incorporated into the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. In 2010, President Obama signed a law purging the term mental retardation from all government documents. In 2013, the mental health community changed its lexicon to intellectually disabled with the DSM-5. But you have to remember that the DSM-5 is written by the American Psychiatric Association. The other organization is also known as the APA, and it is the American Psychological Association. That's people with psychology degrees. Psychiatrists are individuals with a medical degree, and their area of expertise is mental health. Of 1,660 individuals living on Manhattan's East Side, individuals placed in the following categories of degree of impairment. And this is according to Leo Schroll et al. In 1962. Only 18.5% were well, 36.3% were mildly had a problem, 21.8% were moderate, 13.2% were marked, 7.5% were severe, and 2.7% were incapacitated. These are individuals living on Manhattan's East Side. This is in New York City. So the vast majority of these people had some kind of mental problem. Only 18.5% were well. Scientists and researchers are able to advance science by looking at information and speculating on how and why select things take place. For these observations, the researcher will develop an idea about why select things take place. This idea is called an hypothesis. The researcher will then develop and conduct an experiment on the select thing and accumulate data. From the data, the researcher will determine if this hypothesis is correct or incorrect. After the hypothesis has been reconfigured to fit the existing data, the researcher may develop a theory about the select thing. In developmental psychology or science, there are few people who are very much alike. Even the behavior of one individual may not be the same in more than one circumstance. Things change over time. Scientists may have blind spots. Research methods or the applications may be flawed. And this is one of the reasons why research in psychology is so difficult. The case study, the scientific study of abnormal behavior uses case studies, epidemiological research, correlational research, and experimental research. Epidemiological research is the study of the incidence or prevalence of a disorder in a population, also referred to as normative research. Data collected through this method can provide important information about public health trends and risks across different elements of the population. Random sampling, participant selection is by chance from a larger population. Important because the sample determines to what group or groups of people are given finding can be generalized or applied. So this is the way random sampling works. If the entire Navajo Nation was the population, then I would select 2,000 individuals from the 138,488 people who live on the Navajo Nation. I would select 2,000 of those people randomly, um, and that would be my sample. I wouldn't try to check all 138,488 people on the Navajo Nation. I wouldn't try to research all of them. I just use these random individuals, and then I would say they are representative because it's so random. They are representative of all the people on the Navajo Nation. Reliability, the extent to which a measure consistently yields the same results on repeated trials. Uh, Inter-observer reliability, the extent to which different observers or raters agree on the way they categorize or in some way quantify a given observation. Psychological measurement is never as precise as physical measurement. Psychological measures only sample a small part of the domain of how a person acts, thinks, or feels. Validity, a measure is valid if it measures what it purports to measure. Difficult to determine in psychology as much of what is of interest are constructs, hypothetical or theoretical concepts that cannot be measured directly. Aggression, anxiety, intelligence, these are very difficult to measure. A measure can be reliable and yet not valid. Correlational studies look at two variables to see if there is a connection between them. A positive correlation is when one variable increases, the other increases also. A negative correlation is when one variable increases, the other decreases. Everybody who went to the moon has eaten chicken. Good grief, chicken makes you go to the moon. Correlational research can tell researchers something about the strength and the direction of a relationship between variables, but it does not demonstrate causation. Because of the lack of experimental control over the variables measured, there can be an unknown number of other variables that might contribute to any observed relationship. And that's the way variables work. This is 100% variable. You can see the straight line. That's positive. This is 100% negative. This is what most research looks like this. It's scattered all over the place. This one is leaning to the right. That means it's leaning toward positive. This one's leaning to the left. That means it's leaning toward negative. Experimental research is a research method in which conditions are manipulated in order to test the effects of the manipulations on various measures. The essence of the psychological experiment is that the people to be studied are randomly assigned to two or more groups. The experimental group is a group on which the manipulation of interest is performed, and the control group. the group that is treated similarly to the experimental group except that no manipulation is performed. A significant difference is a difference unlikely to have occurred by chance, therefore reflecting a real effect. In psychological studies, a probability of chance findings, 5 of 100 times, p equals 0.05 or lower, is accepted as a significant difference. A placebo effect occurs when an expectation of improvement is sufficient to cause improvement. This effect is particularly relevant for pharmacological studies. A double-blind design is a type of experimental design in which both participants and researchers do not know whether a participant is in the experimental or the control group. That's a double-blind design. A single-subject experimental design is an experimental method that does not rely on groups of participants, but rather uses repeated measures from individual people. That is the end of chapter 1. So let's go on to chapter 2, tackle 2 chapters today. The historical perspective. This ought to be fun. There we go. That looks like where you guys live. Monument Valley. In the summer and early fall of 1693, 17 women and 2 men were taken to Gallows Hill near Salem, Massachusetts, and hanged as witches. Principal accusers were a group of young girls. Betty, 9, and her cousin Abigail, 11, were the first to show symptoms of a strange malady. They sat motionlessly and stared fixedly at an invisible object. They had convulsions, writhing and screaming. The common pattern: one girl in her fits and convulsions claimed to see the spectral form of a villager tormenting her. This was enough for a guilty verdict. Rebecca, their nurse, demonstrated her witchcraft when a group of girls imitated moves made at her trial. Normally, witches in demon possession would hold weak sway over a population. But Salem was a colony established on religious principles, and demons and witches were not discounted lightly. The accusations were accepted by the local medical authorities and, more important, the local religious authorities. So let's hang them. Gallows Hill. Gone into fits. Oh my goodness, that's proof right there. Hang 'em high. When Alexandra goes to bed at night, instead of sleeping, she ponders the future. She sees only pain and misery for her and her daughters. She cries herself to sleep every night and dreams of blood, dismembered bodies, thunder, decay, death, and destruction. Is this normal? Alexandra's thoughts not only encompass her misery, but the impossibility of her life and the doomed status of her daughters. She is afraid to close her eyes, afraid that she will never wake up. One morning, Alexandra can't get out of bed. The thought of facing another day overwhelms her. She wishes that she was dead, and she wishes that her daughters were dead also. She decides to stay home and keep her daughters with her, to protect them. This is Brad. Brad has been hearing mysterious voices that tell him to quit his job, leave his family, and prepare for the coming invasion. The voices have brought increasing confusion to Brad's life. He believes that the voices come from beings from another universe who are somehow wired to him. He now has a sense of purpose in his life due to his specialness, but the communications make him tense and anxious. When he refuses the orders he is given, the voices threaten and badger him until he complies. Brad is afraid of being poisoned, so he eats sparingly. He has taken an apartment away from everyone and stocked it with food and ammunition. His family and friends reach out to him, but every day he retreats further into his world of mysterious voices and imagined dangers. In most cultures, both Brad and Alexandra would be considered psychopathological, maladjusted, emotionally disturbed, or mentally ill. The scientific field devoted to the study of mental problems is called abnormal psychology. Normal and abnormal are determined by the culture, by your culture. Abnormal would be an individual deviating from the norms, unstated and stated rules for proper conduct of the culture. A society's norms tend to reflect their history, their values, institutions, habits, skills, technology, and art. Behavior that breaks legal norms are referred to as criminal. Behavior, thoughts, and emotions that break norms of psychological functioning are called abnormal. But abnormality tends to be situational. Alexandra lives in Afghanistan and lost her husband and son to the Taliban before the American invasion. 56-year-old Julian has just forced himself on a 14-year-old girl. 12-year-old Noki has just shot 3 people. 57-year-old Tilly has just been shunned by his family and has wandered off into the hills and to wait a slow death. Situational problems. 56-year-old Julian has just forced himself on a 14-year-old girl. Julian and Mayaj are from India, where marriages are commonly arranged. Julian was sold Mayaj by her destitute family and now is exacting his rights from the transaction. If Mayaj does not accept him, she can be stoned to death. If Julian does not consummate his marriage, he will lose his livelihood. So both of them will lose. So this 56-year-old man is having sex with a 14-year-old girl. Noki of Angola, 12-year-old Noki has just shot 3 people. Noki is a member of the Angolan Liberation Army and was drafted to be a soldier. His choice was to be a soldier or to work himself to death in a diamond mine. And of course, soldiers shoot people. 57-year-old Tilly has just been shunned by his family and has wandered off into the hills to wait a slow death. Niger is suffering from famine and Tilly can no longer work. Therefore, instead of taking food away from from the children and from his family, he wanders off into the hills to starve to death. According to some psychologists, only behaviors, ideas, and emotions that cause distress can be labeled abnormal. However, distress isn't always necessary for behavior, ideas, or emotions to be considered abnormal. There are no circumstances where Brad's communication with beings that don't exist would be considered normal. Or is there? Voodoo is one circumstance where people are communicating with beings that don't exist, theoretically. Abnormal behavior tends to be dysfunctional. It interferes with daily functioning. They are so distracted or confused by their inability to function normally, they cannot take part in an ordinary social relationship or work productively. People are considered abnormal if they present a danger to themselves or to others. However, research shows that people who are dangerous either to themselves or to others are the exception rather than the norm. Most people struggling with anxiety, depression, and even bizarre thinking patterns pose no immediate danger to themselves or to others. To understand new phenomena, we tend to apply ideas that are useful in another familiar domain. As a science progresses, it moves through a series of models or paradigms about how its subject matter should be viewed. A paradigm provides the following: a viewing framework, vocabulary to discuss, and a recipe to conduct research. Mature sciences like physics have moved through a series of paradigms, each one more powerful than its predecessor. Psychology is a relatively new science in which no single ruling paradigm has yet emerged. Competing viewpoints exist in psychology. Each viewpoint offers a different model or metaphor to explain observations and predict events. And of course, I've had colleagues who didn't agree with the way that I was doing things. Psychology tends to follow schools. You can be a Freudian, you can be a cognitive theorist. I was a humanist. I am a humanist, and I studied Rogers. And because of that, people who study in other schools of thought didn't agree with the way that I saw things. How about that? Okay. Now, Dr. Ross is yeah, is an she studied educational psychology. Her PhD is in educational psychology. Dr. Barber studied forensic psychology. So his school of thought follows forensic psychology. Mine, of course, as I just explained, is humanism. It follows Rogers. So do we all agree on things? Not very often, not not very frequently. Dr. Barber and I agree a lot more frequently than Dr. Russ and I agree, because her focus and her way of seeing things is a little bit different, because she sees things from an educational psychology perspective, and I see things from a more general perspective, an existential point of view or a humanist point of view. Demonology is spirit possession or witchcraft, naturalistic explanations. That would be the medical model or the organic view, psychological view, understanding hysteria, learning, and behavior, and these all have to do with demons. One of the oldest means of dealing with mental illness may have been trephination. Trephination is where you drill a hole in somebody's skull to change the pressure. Trephination is a piercing of the skull, presumably to release evil spirits, but possibly to relieve pressure on the brain. This was practiced in North and South America, pre Columbian, as well as in Europe. So we find skulls, uh, ancient skulls in the Americas that have holes drilled in them. In Greek and Roman times, Europeans thought that emotions were controlled by four fluids circulating in the body. An imbalance of one of the other would cause an emotional reaction. Yellow bile would be frenzied or joyed violence. Black bile, melancholia. Red blood, passion. And green phlegm, grouchiness. Where's the grouchiness? Oh, look at that. He's beating on her. During the Middle Ages, there was a return to the idea that demons cause mental illness, as well as war, urban squalor, and plagues. Whole villages would break into frenzied behavior brought by one of the fear of possession. Whole groups of people would begin dancing and spasming on the ground in what was called St. Vitus dance or tarantism. Tarantism has to do with acting like a spider. Some of these people believed that they had been bitten by the wolf spider or tarantula. Tarantism. I have a wolf spider downstairs in my basement. In Europe, because of the strength of the church and the political climate, mental illness was viewed as a possession by demons. Various methods were used to exorcise the demons. And you can see one being exorcised right there. And he's hugging her by her hips. And that exorcised the demon. Here we go. I don't know what he did to her, but you can see there's a pig, a goat, and a bull coming out of this lady's mouth. And here's another way if you drowned, then you were okay. If you didn't drown, then you were a witch. And another way was to burn them. Lycanthropy became common during the Middle Ages. People thought that unwanted passions were brought to them through the possession of a wolf or other animal. So if you got horny about something, you fell in love with somebody, it was because you were possessed by a wolf, because your passions came from that wolf. Some individuals would actually imagine fur growing all over their bodies and their teeth becoming razor sharp. As a werewolf, the individual did not have to feel guilty about unwanted thoughts. It was the wolf that made them think their impure thoughts. During the Renaissance, the large monasteries that had been set aside by the church for the housing and treatment of the mentally ill more and more frequently came under the control of the state or monarchy. These areas became known as asylums and served as entertainment for the highborn, kind of like going to the zoo. You get to see all the crazy people. In the 16th century, a German physician, Johann Weyer, dared to argue with church beliefs and proposed that mental illness was a psychopathology, that it was caused by an illness in the mind. While the mentally ill were now housed alone in asylums instead of with common criminals, reform did not begin until after the French Revolution in France, and this was at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. Philippe Pinel was the first reformer of asylums, and while he unlocked the inmates, he instituted such humane treatments as can be seen on the left. There you go. Reform of the treatment in mental hospitals occurred 3 years after Pinel's reforms in England. William Tuke, a Quaker, proposed more humane treatment for England's mentally ill in 1796. Tuke established a country retreat for the mentally ill in York. At the retreat, Tuke used the quiet atmosphere as well as rest, talk, prayer, and manual labor. Not to be outdone, the United States waited 50 years before anyone cared enough to get the mentally ill unchained. Dorothea Dix petitioned the state of Massachusetts to promote more humane treatment of their female inmates. She was successful, but only in Massachusetts. Each state maintains its own mental health facilities. Dix was successful in getting 32 states to establish state hospitals, including a national hospital in Washington, D.C. And I've seen it. It's there. It doesn't have very many people there, but it is in Washington, D.C. Trying to think of the name. It had the guy that tried to assassinate President Reagan. Was like the only guy in this whole wing. I can't think of it. With more enlightened idea of mental illness, doctors and scientists began looking at why mental illness occurred. Emil Kraepelin of Germany came up with the idea that mental dysfunction was caused by physical factors such as fatigue. Biological discoveries supported the somatogenic perspective. One of the major forms of mental illness at the time was general paresis, caused by syphilis. Syphilis is a bacteria, a sexually transmitted infection that gets into your brain and spinal column, into your central nervous system, and it causes the fusing of your vertebra so that you're stiff. And it causes you to have mental aberrations. Syphilis is caused by the bacteria Treponema pallidum. Bacteria in this case, caused insanity. Kraepelin linked mania, excited reactions with depression to form the manic depressive category, because the psychiatric records demonstrated the following. Symptoms sometimes alternated with each other in the same person. Both mania and melancholia showed an abrupt onset and a periodic course in which the person tended to show spontaneous recovery, but a high likelihood of future reoccurrences. In neither case was there progressive mental deterioration or physical symptoms such as paralysis. Kraepelin created dementia praecox based on symptoms which had two common characteristics. Early onset, usually in adolescence or young adulthood, thus praecox or precocious, being precocious. A progressive downhill course toward an incurable dementia, mental incompetence. While irreversible, the outcome was not death, but rather stabilization at a reduced level of mental and social capacity. And of course, dementia praecox became known later as schizophrenia. Kraepelin's two major classifications accounted for about two-thirds of all the patients in mental hospitals at the time. These major classifications established the possibility that categories of mental disorders reflected distinct disease processes. The cause and cure of these types of disorders could proceed more rationally if they were investigated as organic diseases. People in mental hospitals welcomed the biological theories because it meant that there was more likely to be medical solutions to mental problems. Physicians tried tooth extractions, tonsillectomy, hydrotherapy, hot and cold baths, and lobotomy to cure mental problems. Only electroshock therapy was successful. It wasn't until the 1950s that effective medications were discovered to treat mentally ill patients, and the biological perspective actually began paying dividends. So until then, we were doing really strange things to these individuals, trying to knock them out of their mental incapacity. After a century of organically oriented research, the foundation of the disease model of mental illness remains surprisingly incomplete. With very few exceptions, there are no laboratory tests that can be conducted to detect the presence or absence of a mental disorder or even any biochemical findings that are specific to particular disorders. A precise physical cause has never been found for most DSM 5 diagnoses. About the time that Kraepelin was changing the treatment habits in mental hospitals, the psychogenic perspective was gaining steam. Many people believe that the psychogenic approach began with Sigmund Freud, but the reality is that this approach was being used before Freud, and in fact, Freud trained under Joseph Breuer, who treated hysteria with a talking cure. The beginning of the psychogenic approach came from hypnotism, the power of suggestion controlling people's behavior, and this was done by Anton Mesmer, Hippolyte Bernheim, and Ambrose Liebold. One of the modern perspectives on abnormal behavior is a sociocultural perspective. Sociocultural theorists such as Thomas Szasz feel that it is incorrect to look at an individual behavior without taking into account the social roots of the abnormal behavior. Szasz has gone as far as to say that mental illness is a myth. It is merely an individual having problems living in a deviant society. Sociocultural theorists feel that modern society stigmatizes individuals given the label mentally ill and thus increases their alienation from society. Sociocultural theorists also recognize that people are stigmatized by society due to their gender, race, ethnicity, lifestyle, poverty, and accumulation of discrimination. Many leading scholars take a more eclectic approach to the concept of psychology by accepting the complexity of abnormal behavior and supporting the biological, psychological, and sociocultural concepts. This approach is sometimes called the biopsychosocial perspective because it recognizes the interplay between the three differing perspectives. In the 1950s, the first psychotropic medications were developed. Psychotropic means mind-changing. Sorry, I needed a drink. The first psychotropics developed were antipsychotic drugs, drugs that corrected disorganized thinking. Antidepressants were the next to be developed. They lifted the mood of depressed people. Anti-anxiety drugs have been the last form of psychotropic to be developed. They reduce tension and worry. Anti-anxiety drugs are also called anxiolytics. The most numerous mental health workers are social workers. There are more social workers than all other categories of mental health care workers combined. Social work as a profession didn't begin until the 1950s. The second most numerous mental health care worker is the psychologist. These people are primarily counselors and usually have a PhD. Marriage and family therapists became a profession in the 1940s, along with psychologists. The least numerous mental health worker are MDs or DOs specialized in psychology, and these are known as psychiatrists. 75% of all bachelor degrees in psychology are awarded to women. 66% of all advanced degrees in psychology are awarded to women. 77% of all social workers are women. 48% of all psychologists are women. 55% of all marriage counselors are women, but only 25% of all psychiatrists are women. And that is the end of chapter 2. So next week we'll tackle chapter 3. So talk to you next week.